Hello, everyone. Eric from Helps here on YouTube Live. Good to have you here on November 12th, 2025. If you're there, say something in the chat so I can see you. Um, Good to have you here. So my name's Eric, attorney now for 46 years, the founder of Helps. Helps is a national law firm that represents seniors and disabled persons who owe debt they can't afford to pay. And what we do is we represent seniors to stop debt collectors from harassing them. That's our main mission. Our second mission is to educate seniors how they can maintain their financial independence. Uh, so good to have you here. Better if I could see if there was someone on the chat, because I usually see that. I don't see it right now. Uh, um, so I'm going to read something. I found this on the internet. You might find it interesting. Um, Hold on here. Can you check if the chat's working on what's that? I didn't hear you. Yeah. So these person they this is the comment on a website. It says my parents live in Alabama and are both unemployed and on Social Security. Problem is they owed a they owe a lot of credit card debt. They tried to keep up with the bills, but it got too much for them on their Social Security only income. They contacted a lawyer in order to declare bankruptcy, but instead the lawyer, after asking them questions about what they owned, said their assets aren't worth anything for collectors. A 20-year-old truck, 24-year-old car, and an over 30-year-old mobile home that would probably not survive being moved again or and living on rented land. And and since their only income is Social Security, the collectors can't garnish it. So the lawyer told my parents to simply ignore their credit card bills. Uh, and the credit card company saying there is nothing of value uh, the creditors would want, and they can't garnish their Social Security income. Um, is it really that simple? Because the credit card companies are calling them every single day now, and I'm worried about them. Uh, so, what's the answer? It is that simple. That's and this attorney was being literally honest with these people, telling them the truth. Um, he was being honest with them. That's what I used to tell people when seniors would come in when I was doing bankruptcies years ago. I tell them, hey, you don't need to do anything. No one can touch your Social Security. No one can touch your pension. It's protected. You can't afford bankruptcy. You don't really need to file bankruptcy. Um, you just choose not to pay the debt. But the only problem is if you don't pay the debt, uh, creditors could call and make your life miserable. Okay. And now I can see the chat feature. Thank you, Derek, my tech guy. Okay. Move it over to the other side for me, or I'll move it over. Thank you. Good. It's really that simple. Okay, you're. Is it really that simple? That's the title of today's video. Uh, Senior with debt. Is it really that simple? It is. You don't need to pay the debt. Now, um, what helps does is what we do is we send out what's called a cease and desist letter to the creditors that owe money to. Under a federal law passed in 1978 called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, it provides if you're represented by an attorney, collectors have to leave you alone. So that's what happens. We send out cease and desist letter, creditors have to leave you alone. Okay, so I've got the chat feature open and I can look at your questions and a lot about turkeys. Okay, I go. Uh, let's see here. See if there's any question other than turkey questions. Not so far. So good. Okay. So that was on this website called Reddit. Okay. And here's another one, the second one. So my 83-year-old great aunt has recently contacted the family distraught because she has dug herself into a hole of no return. She has 79,000 of credit card debts ranging from 20 to 30% interest, as well as a timeshare that she stopped paying a few years ago that now shows as 23,000 delinquent debt on her credit score. Um, she owns her own home outright, but turns out she's a hoarder, so it's totally trashed and full of black mold. So we might get 50,000 for it from a flipper if we're lucky. And even then, she would need a place to live. So she does get around 6,000 a month from a combination of her pension and Social Security. So theoretically, she was debtless. She would be doing fine. That's right, because no one could touch your Social Security or your pension. My mom's idea was to get a big loan against her home equity, but she got turned down for sight unseen for a HELOC loan. Uh, Also borrow against a life insurance policy she had put, but that only yielded 44,000, which we think she'll need to find a new place. My family is trying to think of these creative ways to pay down her credit cards, including her deeding her house to someone with good credit's name in order to get a HELOC and then paying off her debt and fix up the house as well as the pension to pay off, blah, blah, blah. But she thought, but the thought I had today is, why? Good thinking. Why pay the debt at all? At 83 years old, shouldn't she be able to either declare bankruptcy or ignore the debt until she dies? If not, it's not like she needs credit for the rest of her life. You're right. She doesn't need to file bankruptcy. She can ignore the debt. No one's going to take her home. Um, no one's going to take her Social Security or her pension. In 2012, Congress passed a law, a rule that says that if you get sued and they try to garnish your bank account, the bank examines your bank account. And if you get a federal benefit like Social Security, they times the amount you get each month times two, automatically protect that amount from garnishment without you having to do anything. So Great Anna's going to be fine. Even if she had more in her account than the twice the amount of her federal benefit, she could file a claim of exemption or challenge the garnishment and get the money returned. She doesn't have to worry about the 80,000 debt or the amount she owes on the timeshare. She's going to be fine. Anna from California. How long can a credit card debt collector contact you? Well, what happens is the original credit card will try to get you to pay the debt, and if you don't pay it, they'll turn it over to debt collection agency, and they'll try to get you to pay the debt, and they may sell it to a new debt collector. So that's the purpose behind helps is when you're represented by an attorney or when you send what's called a cease and desist letter, then that debt collector can't call you anymore. They have to, or send you a demand letter. They have to communicate with us, not you. Okay. I've had people tell me that they got contacted by a debt collector for a debt that's 20 or 30 years old. Now, there is a statute of limitations that limits a debt collector from being able to sue you after a number of years. But the bottom line is, what's important to remember is that your income is protected. Your Social Security, your pension, your disability, your VA benefits, your IRA, 401k, that money is protected under federal and state laws and can't be taken from you. So it doesn't matter. You don't have to pay the debt. Okay. Is there a minimum credit card debt amount for helps to help? Well, practically speaking, uh, not really. We don't have a minimum, but obviously, if someone came to us and they had like $1,000 or $500 or maybe even 2,000 or less, we'd tell them to say, you really don't need us. You maybe only have with one creditor. We'll go over that with you, but it's kind of relative. Um, 3,000 in debt for one person could be like $1 million or 50,000 for another person. So, and it depends on a person's personality. Sometimes people are very susceptible to being harassed, and so we work with people. So we don't have any minimum. Same with income. Doesn't matter what you make as long as it's protected income. Why? Well, certain part of the countries are more expensive to live than other parts of the country. You might have $5,000 in income in California, and if you're someplace, in other states, that might be like, wow, that's a lot of money. But in parts of California, you'd be really living in poverty because it's so expensive. Okay. Um, Pamela asks, if a debt collector has filed a judgment against me and I have congestive heart failure, short of breath, and severe spine problems, will it be enough for the Colorado judge to dismiss the filing? They don't care about your health situation, Pamela. Um, but you don't need to worry about it. If your income is protected, like we've talked about, you could have a judgment against you from 100 different creditors for $100 million. They can't take anything from you. Okay, you're judgment proof. So when you enroll in helps, you give us the creditors you owe money to, and if it's a lawsuit, you give us that lawsuit. We send a letter to the creditors or the collectors. We'll send a letter to the attorney who sued you. We're going to let the attorney know that your income is protected, you can't afford to pay it, to leave you alone. And then what we're going to tell you is you can always call us with questions if you're worried or scared, because you don't need to be worried or scared. So all the judge cares about is, do you owe the money or don't owe the money? Now, if you owe the money, you can get a judgment. The judge can't force you to pay that debt. It's up to the attorney for the creditor that sued you to try to get you to pay the debt. And there's laws he has to comply with, and he can't take your Social Security, can't take your pension. Now, he's not going to tell you that. A lot of times they're going to try to intimidate you into thinking that you need to pay. I just did a video with Senior Living yesterday I think on 6 things a debt collector doesn't want a senior to know. And one of the things is they don't want you to know that your income is protected. And they don't want you to know if you're sued and they get a judgment that they can't take money from your bank account. And they don't want you to know that they're not going to take your other assets. Okay. Okay. So that we took care of the attorney in Alabama that gave that person, told them the right thing. They didn't need to file bankruptcy because no one could take anything from him. Bless that guy's heart. He said the right thing. And then this nephew who had the great aunt, he finally says, he thought, why pay the debt at all? You're right. She doesn't need to. You said on one of your podcasts that you don't have to show up for court. Well, what I mean by that is this: if you get sued and there's a lawsuit against you, usually in most states there's a summons and a complaint. The summons says you have so many days to file an answer if you're going to contest the lawsuit. And sometimes it'll have a date and time for court. But if you read it carefully, that's only if you're going to contest or fight the lawsuit. If you owe the money, uh, to contest the lawsuit might be a waste of your time. You're going to lose. So you don't necessarily need to contest the lawsuit. Now you can contest it if you want, but a lot of times you're just going to embarrass yourself. So if you don't contest the lawsuit, they're simply going to get a judgment against you. They can't collect from you, as I explained. Okay. Now, if they do get a judgment, it is possible that you could be required to go to court for something called some type of, commonly it's called a debtor's exam. I don't like to talk about that because it happens pretty rarely. That's where a judge orders you to come into court to answer questions about your assets to see if there's something that a creditor could take from you. Now, the judge doesn't prepare that. It's prepared by the attorney who sued you. And that doesn't happen that often. Once again, when a helps client is sued, we send a letter to the attorney. We let them know that your income is protected, that you're not going to pay the debt. It makes it a lot less likely they would choose to try to haul you into court. So, no, you probably don't need to go to court, especially if, at the beginning, if you owe the debt, then you simply get a judgment. But sometimes the paperwork you get is kind of confusing because they'll have a date and a time. But if you read it carefully, it'll say, well, that's only if you're going to contest the lawsuit. Okay? We got videos that talk about that too. And you can always call and talk to us, of course, about this kind of stuff. Okay. So this guy goes on, the one about his great aunt. He says, am I missing something here? What would be the point of trying to wrangle that amount of debt at that age? She's 83. Isn't isn't the play just to ignore it? Yep. Paying it off for someone who will realistically die in the next 10 years. Her health is terrible and she won't go to the doctor. Seems like a big waste of resources. You're right. But I don't want to tell her to just default if there's something I'm missing other than that she should give the house to one of us first. Okay. That's a different topic, but uh, no, he's right. It's a waste to pay that debt. Okay. So I talk a lot here about the lack of information that's given to seniors, misinformation. Um, so here's another example that I'm going to show you. Okay. I get frustrated with this. Sorry. Okay. Here's an article. It's from last March, but I just happened on it just today. Uh, it's from CBS News Money Watch. And maybe I've talked about this article before, but there's a lot of them. Okay. 3 ways seniors can have their credit card debt forgiven this March. Look what it says here. We may receive commissions from some links to products on this page. So that's why they write these. That means, can you trust the article? Someone's writing it for their financial incentive. So what are the 3 ways they can have their credit cards forgiven? Okay. Pursue do-it-yourself forgiveness, which is kind of hard to do. If you're a senior on limited income, you don't have a lot of money to deal with the creditors. Okay. And then what's the second thing? Work toward debt forgiveness with a debt relief company. So that's where they get the CBS gets financial incentive. They steer people to debt relief, and a debt relief company. It's not their practice or a debt management or debt settlement company to tell you, by the way, your income is protected. You don't need to pay the debt. I talk to seniors all the time, signed up for debt management or debt settlement, put into utter poverty, making a payment for a debt they don't legally have to pay. Remember, if your income, Social Security, pension, disability, VA benefit, it's protected. You can choose not to pay the debt. You can be protected from debt collector harassment by a cease and desist letter, and they got to leave you alone. And so you know, if you call a debt relief or debt management company, are they going to tell you, hey, you don't need our services because your income's protected? They're not going to tell a senior that. They're probably not even going to ask if you are a senior. They're going to treat seniors the way they would treat a younger person who could be sued and garnished. Okay. So what's the third option that this company's going to give you? This CBS News article that that someone's getting paid to write. Okay. Well, here it is. Opt for bankruptcy protection. Well, we just read about the guy who said, "Why file bank?" The attorney says you don't need to file bankruptcy. And remember, this article is for seniors, so that's what we're dealing with. Uh, and seniors don't want to file bankruptcy. It sounds scary. So I don't want to file bankruptcy, so I guess I have to pay the debt, which you don't have to. So you can see why I get frustrated, because we talk to helps here to the seniors all day long, hundreds, thousands, okay, who have debt problems, and a lot of them are signed up with a debt management company, and we ask them, well, did they tell you that your income was protected? You didn't need our help? Didn't need their help? No, Mr. Olsen, they never told me that. Well, if they would have told you that, you would have signed up with it. They wouldn't be making money off you. So that's my latest spiel against debt management or debt settlement companies. Shame on them. Okay. My younger working years, I paid into Social Security with money backed by gold and silver. Today, they give it back with a promise. Well, okay. You see this picture right here? That's Roosevelt signing the Social Security bill. Okay. Um, Elizabeth Perkins was his first cabinet secretary in the United States. That was signed in 1935. She was the one who literally came up with the idea for Social Security. Okay. Roosevelt appointed her to be labor secretary because she was his labor secretary in New York State. And she said, the only way I'll take the job is if I can come up with some legislation to be able to help older people. This was during the Great Depression. And young families before then had been able to take care of their parents. Because of the Great Depression, a lot of these families, they couldn't anymore. They had enough problem raising their own children. My grandpa was one of them. Um, and so she came up with the Social Security, which is protected, and it's not going to go away. Now, Congress has tweaked Social Security, so they borrow against it, and they pay things maybe they shouldn't be paying with it, but it's not going to go anywhere. The laws will be, it's kind of like the bedrock of the country. If Social Security, something happened to us, everything is going to fall down. That's the last law that's going to be changed. Now, they may raise the age that you get the Social Security. They may play with your benefit if you have extra income. They're going to do anything they can, but they're going to keep that basic bedrock of Social Security to be able to protect seniors. So I don't want you being out there scared that your Social Security is going to be gone next year. Okay. So Mrs. H asks, in an unlimited homestead state, okay, that means, what does that mean? Okay, so if you're buying a home, different states have different laws that protect a certain amount of equity in a home. Some might protect 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 700,000. In some states, it might be unlimited. No matter what the value of your home, it's protected. Example that would be Texas, pretty much in Florida. Okay, will and other states as well. Will a senior still get a debtor's exam? The senior still works, but most of the money works pay is not taxable income. Will they have to still? No, it doesn't matter if you get a debtor's exam or not. You're not gonna if your income's protected. You're not gonna have to pay the debt. Okay? No, you're not gonna have to pay the debt. You know, when we enroll someone, or if you get sued a lawsuit, one of the things we tell us, client is, you don't need to go to court, but if you get a paperwork after the lawsuit, get us a copy. Or if you get something that says you're supposed to come into a court at a certain time, we want to know about that so we can look at it and tell you what needs to be done. But no, just because you get a debtor's exam doesn't mean you're going to have to pay the debt. No, no. So Judy says, you tell them, Eric. I imagine you're commenting about my comments about Social Security. Well, the reason I tell this is because I don't want people to sit home and be worried when they don't need to be worried. Okay? There's a lot of things that would have to happen before Social Security would be at risk. Pretty much this country would have to financially just go totally, completely under. It's not going to happen. I mean, there's worse things going to happen. Social Security ain't going to go away. So here's a note I sent to some of our paralegals that do intake. I said, don't hesitate to send an email to one of our attorneys for us to call a client. Usually a new enrolled client about what's called a reverse mortgage. And I says, we generally don't want non-attorneys that helps to broach the idea about a reverse mortgage, but leave that to a helps attorney. Why is that? Well, first off, a reverse mortgage is if you're buying a property and you have enough equity, there's a loan available that's backed by the federal government that would pay off your existing mortgage, and you don't have to make a mortgage payment anymore. You own the home to the day you die. You still could sell it if you want, and it only gets sold either when you sell the home or when you pass away. Okay? You could still leave the equity to your kids. So why don't I want non-attorneys that helps to talk to people about this? Well, because I'll read what I said. I said there is a ton of misinformation and misconceptions about reverse mortgages. They're not for everyone, but for some persons, they're an answer to prayer. And then I put down at least one of the couples need to be at least 62 years or older. The older you are, the easier it is to get a reverse mortgage. You have to have enough equity, generally with our higher interest rates, at a minimum of at least 50%. We have a couple of emails on reverse mortgages with videos that I told them they could look at. You can always try to turn someone over live to one of our attorneys if possible, to an attorney to talk about a reverse. And I concluded by saying, like I said, a reverse mortgage can really save someone if they want to stay in the home. So, I've read articles about people from different so-called authorities that say reverse mortgage is a bad idea, always a bad idea. Well, it may be a bad idea in a lot of cases, but not every case. It's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Okay, yeah, there may be some dirty bathwater, but that reverse mortgage to keep that home could really save someone. So, and part of the problem is, there's just not a lot of knowledge about reverse mortgages. When I first started helps, back in 2012, even though I've been doing bankruptcy for years, I had a elementary knowledge about reverse mortgages, but I've learned a lot since then. So anyway, so I talked to this person today. I think it was from Tennessee. Her income was $1,250 a month. So there's three things I want to talk about our conversation, and she might be listening. I told her to listen, and I love it. If you had a car that had three pistons, or an outboard motor had three pistons on it, these three things that problem she had hit every one of those pistons that I don't get to talk about a lot. Okay, her income was like $1,250, and she paid a little bit over 300 in rent, so she had $900 left over, and her age was 71. So if I'm talking, and you know who you are, and she enrolled in helps, but then as we were going on afterwards, she said, "I got a few more questions for you, Mr. Olsen." I said, "Sure." Um, it turned out she was paying $317 in life insurance, whole life and term insurance. That's from her $1,250 out of income, and that's rent. After rent was like, or was $350 or something like that. So that left her income like at $600 or a little bit over that. Um, and I said, "You do not need life insurance." "Well, I want to leave something for my kids." Your kids don't want their mother impoverished paying life insurance. No, life insurance is if you're going to die next month, maybe, and you have life insurance, it might make sense. But you're healthy, right? "I am healthy." I said, "No, you don't." Yeah, and she's got some whole life, which might have some cash value. She could cancel, get that money back, and then term don't need it. If you had minor children at home, then maybe it could make sense. But even at $1,250 a month income, I don't know how she could afford it. And I said, "Stop it. You can't afford it." "I know I can't afford it." "Well, then don't pay it." Okay, well, I thought that was the end of the conversation. And then she said, "Well, I got one more other thing. My car insurance. I don't know what's with your car insurance." "Well, they say I'm upside down on my car." Well, the car was a 2014 that was paid off. And I said, and it's worth, she said, worth $2,000 to $3,000 because it had mold issues on her car. And I said, "Are you trying to tell me that you have full coverage on your car?" And she said, "Yes." Now, I'm not making fun. Please don't get me wrong. I'm telling you this because this can help a lot of people. In fact, when I told her at the end of the conversation, "I'm going to talk about this on YouTube Live today. This will help people. The problems you have will help people." If you've got an older model car, okay, that's not worth a whole lot of money, you don't need full coverage insurance. You just need the minimum insurance to make it legal for you to drive, and that would be just liability. I asked her, I said, "You're a pretty safe driver?" She says, "Yes, I don't drive a whole lot." You pay a lot of extra money for full coverage. That means that if you got in a wreck, they're going to look at your car, and you might think it's worth 10 or 15,000, but they look at it and say, "Oh, it's only worth 2 or 3,000." You pay a lot of money for that car insurance when you don't need it. You only need to keep the minimal amount of liability insurance, which covers you in case you're in a wreck. It'll pay the other driver. And then even at that, you only want the minimal amount because you don't need to have more than the minimum, because if you got in a big wreck and caused a lot of damage and they came after you and sued you and got a judgment, they couldn't collect from you. You just want the minimal amount. You're poor. You only get $1,250 a month. So you can stop what's called collision that would pay for your car, and stop comprehensive that would pay for your car. Stop it. And that's going to save her another $100 a month, I'm guessing, at least. And then I thought we were done with the conversation until we had the third piston. "I got another question, Mr. Olson." "Well, it's about my estate." "What about your estate?" "I have 3 storage units from my mom and dad from 10 years ago." "Okay. How much are you paying for the storage units?" $300. So now we got 1250 minus the life insurance brings it out to about 950. 850 for another $100 for the extra car insurance she doesn't need, and now an extra $300 for the storage facility. So is that 950, 850, 750, 650, 550? Okay, and then from 550 we got to subtract her rent, which is 300. So living off of $250. That's what I told her. And I said, "You can't do that." "But it's my mom's stuff." Okay, and she started to describe some of it. I said, "Well, My kids told me to my kids have told me to get rid of it. Well, your kids are right. You can't afford the $300 a month for the storage unit. You can donate it to someone or have some type of garage sale. Talk to the. You got to get rid of it. It's you know $300 a month times 12 is $3,600. Last 10 years, that's $36,000. I guarantee you the stuff in that storage unit isn't it worth anything or anywhere near that. So if you're saddled with a storage unit, used furniture, used stuff is not worth a whole lot. I go to garage sales or I go to estate sales sometimes. They might have one day. If you know me, you know I'm temporarily living in New Orleans, and I'll check the estate sale sometimes, and they'll have some in old parts of town, and they're kind of fun to go to. Maybe once a month I'll go, and it's kind of fun. They'll have an estate sale, but then the next week or 2 weeks from then, they'll have it. They'll sell what that stuff they didn't sell, and a lot of times there's a lot of stuff left over, and they'll discount it by sometimes 65 or 75%. So your used stuff isn't worth a lot, and 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 I tell them, I said, your mom and dad don't care. They're up in heaven. They're going to tell you that that's just stuff they don't have. They're not thinking about it. They don't care that you can get rid of it. You don't. Now, if there's photos in there, family heirlooms, keep that, but let it go back. Okay, so that's the three pistons. You don't need life insurance, with few exceptions. You know, if you got an old older model car, you don't need comprehensive and collision, just need liability insurance. I mean, you're poor. And the third thing is you don't need to pay that money on the storage facility. Okay. So I'm not making fun of anyone when I say this. I'm trying to help people. And if this lady's listening, I'm really grateful that you kept asking me these questions because I don't talk about these three issues that often. And I guarantee you there's someone out there that's going to hear this and it's going to save them a lot of heartache. And they're going to realize they're going to think, Eric's right. This doesn't make sense for me to do this the way I've been doing it. Okay. Erica, what age should a person take from a 401k? Is it protected? It is protected. And it kind of depends. It's kind of your nest egg. I talked to a friend yesterday who had a 401k, and he's worth health at worse health than his wife. He'll probably predecease his wealth. And he's got 80,000, and so if he passes away before his wife, I think she's going to get his Social Security, which is a little bit higher. And I said, you don't need to dip into that 401k. That will be there. And it was a fair amount of money, almost $100,000. That will be a help to help your wife. Okay. So in some cases, you may just want to let it sit there. Um, I don't think there's a requirement that you take it out early. I'll double check on that, but I don't think there is. So Ms. H asks, okay, so when a senior has a reverse mortgage and is on Social Security and has a reverse mortgage and spent all the money, in other words, a reverse mortgage will pay off your existing loan. If there's excess equity in the home, they might give you a little line of credit. And let's say you've tapped that all out. That's what Mrs. H is saying. But you still have debt. What else can they do? They really can't do anything. They sue you, get a judgment. It could be a lien on the home. They're not going to take the home. So the creditors really can't do anything. You come talk to us. Yeah, so Turbo says, for sure, I told Graham and then Mom that I do not want an inheritance. I want them to be comfy. Yeah, that's what your kids would want. Okay, so Rosalie says, I'm with Helps, and you all did send a cease and desist letter to my creditors, Citibank, and they still sued me. Should I hire a lawyer so that these accounts go away? If you owe the money, I mean, if you dispute the debt and you don't owe the money, you could defend yourself, but I doubt that's the case, Rosie. I mean, if you don't do anything, and they just simply get a judgment. You're gonna get us a copy of the lawsuit. We're gonna send a letter to the attorney, let him know that your income is protected. You can't afford to pay the debt. Um, they can't afford to, and we're gonna call you and explain to you why they can't touch your Social Security, how it's protected in your bank account, like I've already talked about, why they're not going to go after your other assets. So no, you don't need to hire a lawyer. No, you don't need to. Now, if you hired an attorney, that you can't really make it go away because you owe the debt. Does that make sense? You can always call and talk to us. Remember, the nice thing about helps is if you're ever worried or scared or have a question, you pick up the phone and you call. And we'll go over this with you. That our help is ongoing, literally for the rest of your life. Okay. Now, as the debt becomes older and older, there's going to be less and less problems. That's why our fees pretty much terminate after 4 years, but we still are going to be there to help you. Okay, so Franklin asked, my car 2021 will be paid off in 4 years. Should I then drop the full coverage and get on liability to have a lower payment? Well, you have to have full coverage if you finance the car. The lender's going to require that because they figure if you're in an accident and you're at fault, they're going to want to get paid. Okay, so that's what I talked about is only if you've got a car that's free and clear, which was the case with that person I talked to earlier. Yeah, if you've got a car that's financed, the lender's not going to let you just get away with liability insurance. You're going to have full coverage. Oh, so when it's paid off, well, then it depends what the car is worth. What your, if you, it depends what your income is. You could have a car that's, 4 years old that could be worth $20,000, $30,000. And if you got in a wreck and it was your fault, totaled the car, then that's a big hit to take. So you might want to still carry full coverage. Then I'm usually talking about cars that are only worth 5,000 or less or some in that range. But you could have a car worth a little bit more, and if you're a real safe driver and you take the risk, as long as you know what your rights are, you can take the risk with a car that could be worth more than that. Does that make sense? I think that explains it. Okay, so I talked to someone today and from Pennsylvania, a client, and they called on the phone. Now, this person didn't have the internet, didn't have email, and so I wasn't able to send him anything to explain this. But he says, uh, "Original creditor Capital One is still calling me," and I told him, I said, "Are they?" Uh, um, no, no, they're still sending me bills. They weren't calling. I asked, "Are they calling you?" No, they're sending you bills. So the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act applies to debt collectors, not original creditors. But we send a cease and desist letter out to an original creditor. Now, there's several states that apply the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which is a federal law included in state laws. But I asked him, I said, is Capital One calling you on the phone? He said, no, they're just sending me letters. I said, they legally can do that. And um, just don't even, you can throw them in the garbage. Or you don't need to do that. Or, we tell our clients if you want to get the letter, sometimes what you can do is do a change of address to have the statement go to your name, care of helps, and our address. That way it gets sent to us and not you. Okay. Person on a comment on one of her videos, they said, I have a payday loan company that is trying to sue me and I only get Social Security. Well, they can sue you till they're blue in the face. They can't collect from you. You don't need to worry. So in other words, your Social Security is going to be protected from credit card companies, any type of lenders like this. The only person that could possibly take your Social Security would be past due child support, the IRS, but even that can normally be stopped or prevented. The same thing with student loans, and that's even not happening anymore. Student loans aren't offsetting money out of your Social Security. I guess the only other way you could lose your Social Security if there was an overpayment on your Social Security, and then there's ways to deal with that too. So your Social Security is pretty much safe thanks to Elizabeth Perkins up there, right there. Where's she at? Right there. No one knows about her, but we all should be. All anyone receiving Social Security should be grateful for her. This person contacts us from Texas. I'm reaching out for assistance with student loan forgiveness from someone. I am currently in treatment for some type of cancer. I've been approved for long-term disability. Would like to know. Well, if it's a federal student loan and you got disability, you can get the student loan discharge. We got an email that tells you how to do that. Now, if it's a private student loan, and I don't know who LaCordon Blue is, if it's like some trade school or something like that, and it's private, you know, you don't have to pay it. You may not be able to get it forgiven, but they can't collect from you. And call and talk to us. You're going to be fine. Don't need to worry. Uh, Rosie asks, what happens to the debt after the cease and desist letters? It's still there, Rosie. Um, but the important thing to remember is that your income is protected. Your Social Security, your pension, your disability, your forms of retirement. Um, we send a cease and desist letter either to the original creditor or to a debt collector. You might get another letter from a new debt collector on the debt 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. If that happens, you get us that new debt collector. We're going to send a cease and desist letter out to that new debt collector. That's so that this new one will leave you alone. That's one reason why our help is ongoing. It's not just one time. You could theoretically get sued. You may not, but you possibly could. If you got sued, you get us a copy of the lawsuit, and we're going to send a letter to the attorney who sued you, let him know that your income is protected, that you're not going to do anything. We're going to explain to you why you don't need to go to court, why a judgment is pretty much meaningless, so you're going to be fine. So this person contacts us from California, and they get, it looks like VA benefit of about $2,200 and alimony of $600. They live with their kids, and they have $70,000 in debt, a lot. Apparently in the middle of a divorce. And then there's an SBA loan for about $100,000. We explained to her why they couldn't take her Social Security, why it was protected. Did discuss meaning to try to keep up with the SBA loan if possible. Well, I may need to call this person back and tell them probably don't need to do that because the SBA loan can't collect from you either. The only thing the SBA loan could do is offset 15% of your Social Security, and even that would be very rare. Uh, I don't think they could touch the VA benefit. But if you do owe the SBA and they were to offset money out of your account, you could file a bankruptcy and get rid of the SBA loan. You wouldn't have to pay them anything. Yeah. Okay. Person contacts us from Massachusetts. They get a little bit over $1,500 in Social Security, and they get a pension close to $200. And they're unemployed. And she was let go from her job. Apparently, she fired him, sued her employer, and got some type of settlement that the money's run out, and looking for other work, which looks like she may get, and wants our help in the interim to keep the creditors off her back. It's like we enrolled her because she is getting some Social Security. Here's a note. She says, "Thank you kindly, Amy, for talking to me yesterday. I found your information of great interest and relief. In particular, it really opened a door for me. After spending a lifetime paying my bills with my identity tied up with this badge of being responsible, I read with interest all the materials you sent. Thank you. I definitely like to enroll and get started working with helps," which looks like we did. Um, there's no reason to be embarrassed if you're having these problems. Okay. Some statistics show that 48% of seniors are classified as economically vulnerable. That means that under some criteria, their income is within 200% of the poverty line. And the older you get, the higher the percentage is that seniors are economically vulnerable. And a lot of seniors, they retire owing debt. They didn't intend to be in the position they were. It's just life got them there. Uh, Maybe they were helping their kids. Maybe a spouse died. Maybe they lost their job like this person did. A lot of seniors that have these debt problems, they didn't do it intentionally. They didn't run up the debt intending not to pay it. Just life happened. And if they had the money, they would pay it. They simply don't have it. And Congress protected your income for a reason. They want you to have money for your food and your medicine and your utilities. They don't want you to go without. So I don't want you to feel guilty about this. And you can always call and talk to us if you have a question or concern. That's what we're here for. If you're an existing client, even if you're a potential client, I looked at one of these yesterday that I talked about someone yesterday, and they must have called us 20 times before they enrolled in helps. They bounced all over the map, up and finally in the end, they finally realized it. I remember years ago, well, when I was doing bankruptcy, I talked to my partners and I'd say sometimes, people, you can tell they really need to file bankruptcy. I'm not talking about seniors with helps, but other people that are younger. But it takes a while for someone to realize that they need this help. I said the problem needs to ripen. Finally, when you understand everything, you realize, okay, I nearly need this help. And so that's why we're always happy to talk to you and explain this over and again, over and over again if we need to. When help sends out a cease and desist letter to creditors, do you or will you automatically tell the creditors to send all other letters to helps on the change of address with the client's permission? No, we don't do that for a couple reasons. We just don't. We tell our client, in fact, it's in our welcome letter that you get. We say, if it's an original creditor, they can still send you a bill, and if you don't want to get it, you know, that information needs to come directly from the client, not us. Okay, we can't instruct the creditor to send the bill to us. That has to be done. Now we can tell them not to call you or send demand letters, and they can contact us regarding the debt, but we can't instruct them to send the communication directly to us about the monthly statement. That has to come from you. Okay. If your statute of limitations is up, can they still sue you? Um, well, that's asking me if I'm walking down the street, can someone mug me? Well, people break the law all the time. Yeah, and so they could theoretically sue you. We don't see that happening that often. But let's say they did. You'd have a defense, but then you say, well, I'm a senior. I don't know what to do. Well, if you did nothing, they get a judgment. It's their judgment proof they can't collect from you. So that we don't see people getting sued beyond the statute of limitations. For one reason, if they did, the creditor could be sued for violating the law. So it shouldn't be a problem. Okay. Okay. So Rosie says, thank you. You read my message. Thank you, making me feel comfortable because I'm kind of scared. Well, that's what Helps was founded for. If you're scared, you call us on the phone, no matter how often. It says, a lawyer told me that they can garnish my bank account. Well, if someone sues you, they garnish your bank account till they're blue in the face. I mean, but what you need to understand is that your bank account is protected. If you get Social Security and it's deposited into that particular account, that account is protected up to twice the amount of Social Security you get each month. They could garnish you every day of the week, but the bank will protect twice that amount. So it'd be really say, oh, your bank account will be garnished, but the answer is doesn't. It's meaningless. Now, one thing I have said, and I'll say it again. I don't know, it might be an exaggeration, but I don't think it is. 999 out of 1,000 attorneys don't understand that rule that went into effect in 2012 that protects twice the amount of your income deposited in your bank account from garnishment. Now, why do I say that? Well, because I've yet to meet a bank manager that understands that rule. But your bank manager doesn't have anything to do with garnishments. There's a department of the bank that deals with garnishments. They understand the rule and they protect your account. And attorneys that don't practice the law, they don't understand that rule. I don't think they teach it in law school. And you got to realize the law is so vast. There's so many different areas. A lot of attorneys don't practice in this area. Okay, so this guy's from Minnesota, and it says he's calling for his dad, and they're getting process of getting power of attorney for my dad, who's struggling with credit card debt and considering bankruptcy. Nervous to talk to us. He was scammed. He was scammed, and he currently has 75,000 in credit card debt because of the scam. His only income is 2,300 Social Security, 336 pension, and a $300 annuity. He's got an older free and clear car. Doesn't really need to file bankruptcy. We read him what we did. Uh, Health isn't that great. We talk. It looks like we talked to dad and daughter both together. Explained how his bank account is protected. Yeah, so he's going to be fine. I don't know what the total debt is, but $75,000. Wow. So now the daughter's going to be relieved because dad doesn't have to pay the debt. She's going to be relieved because that dad isn't going to get these credit calls. They're going to come to us, and that she can always have someone to call if she's worried or scared. Okay. Oh, time is gone. And thank you, Turbo. You're right. Tomorrow is a 2-hour delay. Okay. Um, Thursday helps. YouTube Live starts 2 hours later. Last Thursday we had a foul up. That's not going to happen tomorrow. So I'll talk to you tomorrow. And everyone have a great day. And if you have any questions, please call us, press the like button, subscribe to our channel. Okay? Have a wonderful day. God bless. Bye.